There was a place in the Middle Ages where even death was afraid to enter, a hole so dark, so silent, that once a person was lowered inside, they were never seen again. They called it the oubliette, from the French word oublier, meaning to forget, and that's exactly what happened to anyone who fell into it. But before we reach that pit of despair, we have to go back to where it all began, to the birth of the dungeon itself. The word dungeon doesn't come from darkness or prisons, not originally. It comes from the old French dungeon, meaning the great tower, the heart of a medieval castle. That tower, known as the keep, wasn't a place of chains and screams at first. It was where the Lord lived, where his treasures were kept, and where his family hid when war came knocking. Thick stone walls, tiny windows, a fortress within a fortress, impossible to breach. And yet, that same strength made it the perfect place to hold someone captive. By the 11th century, these keeps were square, massive, block-like structures of stone. But then came the battering ram, and everything changed. Round towers replaced square ones, deflecting the blows, stronger, safer, colder. As the shape of castles evolved, so did the idea of power and control within them. And deep beneath those towers, behind the safety of walls, another kind of darkness was being built. You see, in early medieval times, people didn't really imprison criminals. They were fined, mutilated, or executed. Simple, brutal, efficient. But when wars tore kingdoms apart, powerful men needed a way to hold political enemies, not just kill them. A living hostage was far more valuable than a dead one. And so, underground chambers began to appear, not for punishment, but for leverage. Yet soon, those rooms became something else entirely. One of the most terrifying examples still stands today, hidden beneath Pontefract Castle in Yorkshire, England. Built in the 9th century, its dungeon system was massive, a labyrinth of fear carved into stone. In 1311, King Edward II held his own cousin, Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, and 20 rebels there before their executions. Imagine it. The flicker of torches, the stink of damp earth, the echo of chains. A place where nobles fell as easily as common thieves. Almost a century later, in 1399, another royal prisoner would meet his fate there. King Richard II himself. After surrendering to Henry Bolingbroke, he was secretly moved from the Tower of London to Pontefract. Locked away beneath the keep, surrounded by wet stone and silence, Richard either starved or was murdered. No one truly knows. He died on Valentine's Day, 1400, just 33 years old, and his death cleared the way for Bolingbroke to become King Henry IV, a crown built upon bones and a dungeon's darkness. But even the mightiest walls crumble. During the English Civil War, centuries later, Oliver Cromwell made it his mission to erase Pontefract Castle. To him, it was a symbol of everything corrupt, the last royalist stronghold refusing to die. He convinced the townspeople to join him, promising freedom from the past. They agreed, their memories full of blood and grief. In 1649, the great walls fell, torn apart stone by stone. Yet, deep underground, the dungeons remained. Silent, eternal. Because some things built for suffering never truly disappear. And Pontefract wasn't the only place that hid such horrors. Next, we traveled north, to the borderlands, where another castle became the cradle of nightmares. A place where screams didn't echo, because the walls were too thick to let them out. North of England, along the blood-soaked border between two warring nations, England and Scotland, stood another fortress of fear, Chillingham Castle. Once a peaceful manor, it was transformed into a stronghold of nightmares. Given to Grey family in 1246 and later reinforced by King Edward III, Chillingham became both a fortress and a grave. Here, the infamous Edward I, known as the Hammer of the Scots, imprisoned his enemies, men, women, even children. They weren't simply captured. They were broken, limbs shattered, bodies maimed, and finally dropped through a trapdoor 20 feet down, into a pit of darkness. That pit was the oubliette. There was only one slit of light, a thin crack that barely pierced a thick stone. Down below, the air was damp, cold, and filled with the smell of decay. No food, no warmth, No hope. Some prisoners, driven by hunger, were said to eat their own flesh before the darkness swallowed them completely. It's believed that more than 7,000 souls perish here, their bodies dumped into the lake behind the castle. The water still ripples today, as if restless from the memories it carries. And Chillingham wasn't alone. Across the North Sea, St. Andrew's Castle in Scotland hid another nightmare. Carved directly from solid rock, its dungeon, known as the Bottle Dungeon, was 24 feet deep and almost impossible to escape. Narrow at the top, wide at the bottom. It resembled the neck of a bottle, but once you were dropped inside, it became your coffin. Prisoners were lowered by rope into the pit. No stairs, no windows, no air. They could barely move, unable to sit, kneel, or lie down. Some were kept alive for weeks, given scraps of food, their minds slowly fracturing. Others starved, their bodies left to rot in the same hole where new victims were thrown, forced to stand on the bones of the dead. In 1402, David Stuart, Duke of Rothesay, heir to the Scottish throne, was imprisoned there. He didn't die in St. Andrews, but his fate wasn't mercy. He was transferred to Falkland Palace, another dungeon, and left to starve to death. His story became a royal warning. Even bloodlines couldn't protect you from the oubliette. A few decades later, Patrick Graham, Archbishop of St. Andrews, met the same fate. Deemed insane, he was locked away, forgotten, and eventually died within stone walls. The oubliette didn't just devour criminals. It devoured anyone who defied the powerful. By the late Middle Ages, these chambers of despair had spread across Europe like a disease. What began as prisons for nobles had evolved into instruments of psychological annihilation. The oubliette wasn't designed to punish the body. It was designed to erase the soul. Imagine it. You're lowered into a vertical shaft barely wide enough to turn around. The rope above retracts. The trapdoor slams shut. Instant darkness. No air, no sound, no way out. You wait for your eyes to adjust, but they never do. You stand in water up to your knees, rats brushing against your legs. Every sound you make echoes back, smaller, weaker, until even your own voice abandons you. Some oubliettes were so deep, they became dungeons within dungeons, buried under layers of stone. Rainwater, filth, and human waste from above trickled down, soaking the prisoners. Days blurred into nights, nights into madness. They weren't just forgotten by their captors. They were erased from the world itself. The name oubliette wasn't a metaphor. It was a sentence, to be forgotten, from the French oublier, to forget. And that's exactly what those who built them intended. These pits existed across the Middle Ages, in France, England, Turkey, and beyond. Each one a silent mouth, waiting to swallow its next victim. At the Bastille in Paris, oubliettes were carved beneath the towers, prisons within fortresses of power. In Rumilly-Hazari, a 15th century Ottoman stronghold, a secret door led to a pit called the Throat Cutter. Anyone who stepped through it fell 13 feet into darkness, alive, broken, and utterly alone. And in London, beneath the White Tower of the Tower of London, there was a chamber so small it mocked the idea of mercy. 4 feet square, not enough space to sit, stand, or lie down properly. They called it Little Ease. A cruel joke. Guy Fawkes, the man behind the gunpowder plot of 1605, was kept there before his execution. The cell wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to unmake you, piece by piece. But the most terrifying oubliettes weren't in castles or towers. They were hidden beneath chapels and keeps, disguised under stone floors and prayer rooms. And when archaeologists finally uncovered them, what they found was beyond imagination. By the late 14th and 15th centuries, the oubliette had become the purest symbol of human cruelty. It wasn't just a prison anymore, it was a philosophy of punishment. To vanish a person so completely that even their memory rotted away with them. In Wales, inside Conwy Castle, King Edward I's architects carved a prison that could make anyone lose their mind. From the elegant Great Hall, a stairwell led down into what they called the prison tower. The upper chambers were tolerable, cold stone, maybe a bed, perhaps a candle. But below, the real dungeon waited, a 12-foot deep pit, hewn directly into the rock, with only one entrance, a trapdoor from above. Once it closed, you ceased to exist. And further south in Pembroke Castle, the story turned even darker. In 1440, a man named John Wytherden was thrown into the Oubliette by Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester. They stripped him of his clothes, left him without food, and tossed scraps of water down the hole. Over the days that followed, blindness took him first, then madness, then the rest. He died naked, nameless, and forgotten. The oubliette had done its job. But some castles perfected the horror. In Leap Castle in Ireland, the oubliette wasn't just a pit, it was a trap of spikes. Hidden near the chapel, its narrow shaft ended in iron points designed to tear flesh apart. During renovations in the 1920s, workers discovered the unimaginable. More than 150 skeletons piled inside the pit, 3 cartloads of bones. For centuries, this chamber had swallowed human beings like an altar of death. No one knew how many had died there, only that the screams must have echoed beneath the chapel as priests prayed above. Even after centuries, the bones still bore marks of fall and of the iron below. They weren't soldiers or kings. They were victims of convenience, rival spies, or simply people who angered the wrong lord. That was the true horror of the oubliette. You didn't need to be guilty. You only needed to be unwanted. Across medieval Europe, darkness had become an art form. Castles were cathedrals of control, built to keep power inside and compassion out. To the nobles who ruled, a man wasn't truly dead until he was forgotten. So they built holes to bury not the body, but the memory. Imagine being trapped in that darkness. The air thick, your throat dry, the echo of your own heartbeat your only companion. Every passing hour becomes a hallucination, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, someone will remember you, but no one ever does. That was the genius of the oubliette. It didn't just kill you, it erased you. When archaeologists uncover these pits today, they often find more than bones. They find the marks of fingernails etched into stone. They find teeth embedded in walls. They find proof of how far the human mind can go before it shatters. And yet, amid the horror, the oubliette tells a truth about humanity that still echoes today. That sometimes the deepest prisons aren't built from stone, but from silence, from a need to look away, to pretend we didn't see what's right beneath our feet. So the next time you walk through the ruins of a castle and feel a chill in the air, look down, because under your feet, there might still be a hole carved in the dark, a mouth of stone that once swallowed the forgotten. And if you listen closely, you might just hear them calling back. Clapperboard Soft CTA, final lines for voiceover. If this journey through the shadows of the medieval era left you speechless, hit subscribe and join us next week for another story history tried to bury. Because sometimes the past refuses to stay silent.